The tragic murder of Charlie Kirk and the arrest of Tyler Robinson, 22, the man suspected of carrying out the killing, in Utah, are the main topics of attention for the U.S. media and the Trump administration. Across the Atlantic, another story is quietly developing. A tale that might have greater impact but is less noticeable in headlines. America's closest European friends are opposing the very trade framework that Trump has been touting as one of his most important policies as Washington turns inward. Triumphs. Donald Trump has reiterated his main pledge since April 2025. He will negotiate agreements with all nations and, in his own words, restore American greatness. Numerous trade deals have since been announced. Here's the twist, though. These days, practically all of them are being targeted. A few are facing legal challenges in the United States. Others are stuck in parliaments abroad. And the most important of them, the deal with America's biggest ally, might not hold up. Thus, the question is straightforward. Is this deal already failing, or did Trump actually win a historic trade victory? A historic trade framework was negotiated between Washington and Brussels in late July 2025. After years of tariffs, threats, and slowed growth, it appeared to be stable on paper. Discussions. Within weeks, however, the European Parliament, which has yet to adopt the agreement, demanded radical changes. Three things are desired by Parliament: a sunset clause that makes sure EU tariff reductions don't continue forever, better safeguards for European industry and workers, as well as adjustments to the 15% flat U.S. tariff on the majority of European exports. That isn't being picky. Those demands go straight to the core of the contract, and the framework as a whole may fall apart if they are not addressed. Let's take a step back. U.S. tariffs on European imports were disorganized before to this agreement. Section 232, sometimes known as the National Security Tariffs, imposes additional charges on top of the patchwork of Most Favored Nation MFN rates, which average 4.8%. Trump had threatened to levy nationwide charges of up to 30%. For automobile industries were a dreadful prospect. This confusion was condensed into a single headline figure, 15% on almost all EU goods in the July Accord. Although it avoided the worst-case 30%, that is still significantly more than the previous average for Europe. Trump saw it as an opportunity to propose a flat, streamlined tariff system that he could portray as fair but firm. The EU consented to remove tariffs on U.S. industrial goods in exchange. That's a significant victory for U.S. exporters, creating markets for chemicals, machinery, and other goods. Why, therefore, the backlash? Examine the trade balance. About $370 billion worth of U.S. goods were bought by the EU in 2024. In contrast, the U.S. purchased around $65 billion worth of European goods. Europe has become America's biggest trading partner. However, under this agreement, the U.S. maintains tariffs in place as the EU eliminates a large number of its own tariffs. The disparity is glaring. The notion is supported by a September poll. 77% of respondents in the 5 largest member states of the bloc think the agreement benefits the U.S. Just 2% claim that Europe is favored. Almost 90% of respondents in France believe that Europe lost out. The vast majority of the bloc continued. They called the arrangement an embarrassment. No politician wants to defend those figures. The most explosive component, Section 232 tariffs, comes next. The United States employs these so-called national security tariffs to safeguard its aluminum and steel sectors. They were at 25% as of March 2025. In practically every country, they doubled to 50% by June, with the exception of the United Kingdom. Additionally, 407 more product codes were added to the tariff list on August 18th. This was more than just unfinished metal or steel. It contained materials for construction, furniture parts, the foundation of contemporary manufacturing, and even ingredients for beverages. This implied that exporters from Europe were unexpectedly hammered twice, both via the flat 15% tariff and these high national security tariffs of 50%, which are applied to hundreds of derivative products. Critics are right when they say that this is a deal breaker. The industries most affected are those that depend on U.S. markets the most: automobiles, metals, machinery, wine, beer, and spirits. Members of Parliament, MEPs, are incensed inside the European Parliament. They contend that Ursula von der Leyen's commission revealed too much. Yes, Trump's threat of 30% tariffs was avoided in the accord. Indeed, it ensured a flat 15% cap in industries like electronics and medicines. However, a number of politicians believe this is a ruse in which Europe gave up its influence without receiving sufficient assurances in exchange. Kathleen Van Bree, the lead socialist MF, put it simply, "We will make the deal better. That is our leverage, and we intend to employ it." It's an obvious message. The ratification vote might not pass unless Parliament sees tangible protections, which would be disastrous for transatlantic diplomacy. Ursula von der Leyen is adamantly in favor of the accord. She refers to it as the best possible agreement with the U.S. She points out 3 victories: avoiding a wider trade war, avoiding more punitive tariffs, and eliminating EU charges on U.S. goods in return for tariff stability. Senior trade official Sabine Wand says that since the agreement, global trade flows have remained constant or even increased. Until the EU enacts new laws, the one obvious exception, autos, will continue to be subject to a 27.5% U.S. duty. The story for the Commission is one of stability. Fairness is a concern for Parliament, and those two tails are headed for conflict. There are still 2 unresolved issues. Autos first. The U.S. has committed to reducing its tariff from 27.5% to 15%. However, only when the EU passes legislation lowering tariffs on U.S. imports. In other words, Parliament dislikes being armed, and relief is conditional. Section 232 exemptions come in second. Although certain industries, such as semiconductors and pharmaceuticals, are limited to 15%, the majority 50% tariffs are still applied to metals. Europe is advocating for restrictions on derivative products, such as quotas or carve-outs. Washington hasn't made a commitment. That is to say, the deal is not finalized. Parliament has the hammer, and it is only partially constructed. The stakes are enormous from an economic perspective. Through 2028, the EU has committed to purchasing over $750 billion worth of U.S. energy products. For European computing, an additional $40 billion in U.S. AI processors is allocated. Centers. Additionally, U.S. strategic sectors are expected to get $600 billion in investments. This is Trump's crown gem, evidence that America is drawing in foreign investment and securing its position as the world's leading energy producer. The idea that stability will be ensured by these agreements is a risk for Europe. What would happen, though, if Parliament rejected the agreement? Overnight, those billions might be frozen. Trade relations may deteriorate. The dream of a solid transatlantic framework may come to an end if we return to tit-for-tat tariffs. In addition to economics, the political climate is bleak. Voters in France already view the agreement as a complete failure. Even in Poland, where suspicion is weaker, half of people believe that the U.S. gains more. Majorities say it is humiliating across the bloc. That starts a risky loop. Politicians who support the agreement run the danger of losing the public's trust. But those who rejecting it could lead to a transatlantic crisis. It's more than a trade war. It is a test of Trump's ability to set terms or of Europe's ability to negotiate as an equal partner. The White House in Washington declares the agreement a victory. Officials highlight greater market access for energy, fishery, and agriculture, the elimination of EU taxes on U.S. industrial goods, and more transparent origin regulations. Trump presents it as a huge opportunity for American exporters, but not all Americans are happy with it. Because Section 232 tariffs increase the price of metals and inputs, certain companies are concerned that supply chains may be disrupted. Businesses that depend on imported parts worry about decreased competitiveness and increased production costs. There are winners and losers in the trade, even in America. What does this leave us with, then? The European Parliament must make a difficult decision. Accept the arrangement and face domestic public outrage, or demand adjustments and risk blowing up the pact. The Commission maintains that stability has been provided. Donald Trump claims he has already won the battle for justice, while Parliament says it must fight for it. Whether transatlantic trade can withstand this tug-of-war without crashing into anarchy is the true question. Because Trump might strike back if Europe demands concessions. If Parliament gives in, public confidence may collapse. Furthermore, the delicate foundation of international trade may be upended once more if nothing changes. This goes beyond steel duties and auto levies. It concerns whether the United States and Europe can continue to operate as genuine partners, or if they are entering a new phase of economic competition. The outcome will influence the balance of international trade for years to come. The stakes are historic, and time is of the essence. Now the question is straightforward. Will this agreement ultimately